Imagine living in a time when liking the wrong man could literally cost you your head, and your friends too. Welcome to Tudor England, where court gossip killed faster than plague, and one woman, Lady Rochford, somehow managed to betray not one, but two queens. The twist? She didn't survive to tell the tale either. History calls her the betrayer of queens. But was she a cunning villain, a tragic pawn, or just another Tudor woman trying to stay alive in a royal Hunger Games run by Henry VIII? Let's dig in very carefully. Thunder growls over Hampton Court like a warning from God himself, or maybe just from Henry VIII, which was basically the same thing back then. The year is somewhere in the early 1500s, and England is a place where your fate depends less on hard work and more on how convincingly you can flatter a man in tights. The air smells of rain, ambition, and roasted swan, the Tudor equivalent of success. Inside, courtiers glide through the corridors, whispering alliances and lies with equal devotion. In the corner of this royal circus stands Jane Parker, not yet Lady Rochford, watching the glittering chaos that will one day ruin her. Jane's story begins in comfort, the kind that comes from being born into nobility. The Parkers were respectable, well-connected, and just ambitious enough to be dangerous. Jane was bright, educated, and raised to play the courtly game. Charm, obey, survive. No pressure. In an era when women were mostly treated like decorative chess pieces, Jane's job was simple: marry well and stay quiet. Spoiler, she did half of that right. Enter Henry VIII, the king who could have been the poster boy for "It's complicated." At this point, he's not the bloated tyrant of later portraits. He's young, athletic, handsome, and absolutely thrilled about being the center of his own universe. Think of him as a Tudor influencer, running an entire kingdom on ego and divine right instead of Instagram likes. He builds Hampton Court not for defense or governance, but because he wants to throw parties that make God jealous. And Jane Parker? She's just one of the many courtiers drawn into his gravitational field. Her family's connections open the door, but it's her marriage that cements her place in history, for better or mostly for worse. The groom? George Boleyn. Yes, that Boleyn, brother to Anne, who will soon become queen, mistress, and eventual headless cautionary tale. George is witty, handsome, and apparently allergic to humility. The kind of man who quotes Latin at dinner to remind you he can. Jane, for her part, is clever but cautious, skilled in the subtle art of court survival. The problem is that being cautious in the Tudor court is like trying to whisper during an explosion. Marriage to George should have been a jackpot. The Boleyns were rising fast and had caught Henry's eye, and the family seemed destined to rule from the shadows. Jane found herself swept up in their glittering ascent. She attended court, danced at banquets, and watched its charm turn into political wildfire. Henry's obsession with and burned bright enough to blind everyone, including Jane. But even then, the cracks were forming. You could almost hear them if you listened closely. The tension beneath the laughter, the envy hiding behind smiles. The Tudor court ran on gossip, and gossip was currency. Every gesture, every word, every look was potential evidence. The courtiers smiled at each other while mentally calculating whose downfall would benefit them most. Jane learned quickly. To survive, you had to know when to nod, when to laugh, and when to disappear into the tapestry. Still, she wasn't invisible. People noticed the young Lady Parker, soon to be Lady Rochford, standing near Anne Boleyn at court functions. She had a sharp mind and eyes that seemed to see too much, not a great trait in a kingdom built on pretending not to notice the obvious. Henry's pursuit of Anne was the worst-kept secret in England, and Jane, through George, was right in the middle of it. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine living in a world where your social status depended on your ability to look impressed every time a man played the lute. Where networking meant attending beheadings in the right outfit. That was Jane's reality, a high-stakes pageant of loyalty and lies, and you thought your office politics were bad. By the time Anne married Henry, Jane's world was spinning faster than she could hold on. Anne was now queen, George was powerful, and the Parkers were practically royalty by proximity. But power in Tudor England came with an expiration date shorter than milk. The same crowds that cheered for and began whispering behind her back. Every miscarriage, every frown, every disagreement with Henry was magnified into treason. Jane watched all this unfold from the background, silent but observant. She learned the most dangerous truth of court life. The line between loyalty and betrayal was a matter of timing. If you spoke too soon, you were a traitor. If you stayed silent too long, you were a fool. Somewhere in between lay survival, for now. History tends to flatten people like Jane into footnotes, labeling them schemers or villains. But imagine being her. A woman bound by the choices of men, trying to balance duty, fear, and the instinct to live another day. Every glance could be misinterpreted. Every rumor could turn fatal. She wasn't playing the game for fun. She was playing because not playing meant death. Meanwhile, Henry was evolving from passionate lover to paranoid despot. The court that once sparkled with poetry and flirtation began to darken. Spies lurked behind curtains. Letters were read aloud as evidence. The same women who had swooned over Henry's charm now whispered prayers for their husbands' necks. Jane, clever and careful, must have felt the shift, that chill that comes before a storm. And then came the marriage to George. The wedding was grand, the expectations higher than the tower walls. But what begins as alliance soon curdles into resentment. George was ambitious, vain, perhaps cruel. Jane was proud, perceptive, maybe a bit bitter. Their union, meant to fortify two powerful families, instead became a quiet battlefield of unspoken disappointments. Still, for a moment, she might have believed she'd made it. The candles at court still burned for her family. The music still played. The bullens still glittered. But deep down, Jane must have known. In this place, no one stayed favored forever. The same wind that carried you up could turn and cut your throat. As the thunder outside Hampton Court rumbles again, foreshadowing the storm to come, the pieces are already moving. Jane's marriage ties her to the bullens, to the crown itself. And in Tudor England, those bonds aren't just alliances, they're shackles. The kind you can't see until it's too late. So here she stands, Lady Jane Parker, future Lady Rochford, unknowingly stepping onto the blood-stained stage of royal history. The lights are bright, the applause is polite, and the audience, well, they have no idea how the play will end. But Jane? She's about to learn that in the Tudor court, survival isn't about loyalty or love. It's about knowing when to betray before you're betrayed. And her first lesson begins the moment she says, "I do." If Chapter 1 was the cinematic opening, thunder, drama, destiny. Chapter 2 is the slow burn that follows. The sound of applause fading into a whisper, and that whisper slowly becoming regret. Because Jane Parker, now Lady Rochford, has officially entered the big leagues. She's married to George Bullen, a man so polished, charming, and self-assured he could probably flirt with a mirror and win. On paper, they're the perfect Tudor power couple. In reality, they're one sharp dinner knife away from disaster. Let's rewind a little. The Bullen family, at this point, are basically England's Kardashians, glamorous, controversial, and dangerously overexposed. And Bullen has already captivated Henry VIII, dragging her entire family up the social ladder behind her like a royal tow truck. Her brother George, Jane's new husband, basks in this reflected glory. He's witty, educated, multilingual, and deeply aware of it. The kind of man who makes you feel like you're attending a TED Talk every time he speaks. Jane, on the other hand, is practical. She understands that court life is like walking a tightrope. One wrong move and you're lunch for the ravens. So when she marries George, she probably tells herself this is the smart play. Security, prestige, access, all the things that matter in a world where love is more of a hobby than a strategy. But the honeymoon doesn't last long. George's attention isn't exactly glued to his new wife. He's too busy writing poetry, attending banquets, and following his sister and around court like her personal hype man. For Jane, that's not just irritating. It's humiliating. The court notices everything, and gossip spreads faster than fire in a hay barn. Behind closed doors, their marriage begins to crumble. Imagine the Tudor equivalent of an emotionally unavailable husband scrolling through parchment instead of Instagram. George is charismatic in public, cold in private. Jane's sharp tongue doesn't help. They argue, maybe about ambition, maybe about the simple fact that neither of them was built for partnership. Still, in public, they smile. They have to. Appearances mean survival. And besides, Anne's rise to power promises endless benefits. By 1533, Anne is Queen of England, married to Henry, and pregnant with what everyone assumes will be a male heir. The Boleyns are untouchable for now. But even at the height of this golden age, Jane's world feels claustrophobic. She's trapped in a marriage of performance. Every gesture is calculated, every glance monitored. The court's glamour is suffocating. Silk, jewels, and silent resentment stitched together. The servants gossip, the courtiers scheme, and Jane plays her role. Loyal wife, devoted sister-in-law, and silent observer. She probably watched Anne's coronation from behind the tapestries. Radiant queen, adored by crowds, crowned in gold. Maybe she even smiled. But deep down, a quiet thought must have whispered. What happens when the king's love runs out? Because it always does. Henry VIII's affection is like the English weather, passionate one moment, punishing the next. His love for and turns England upside down, breaking from Rome, defying the Pope, rewriting laws. But when Anne fails to produce a son, that same love curdles into fury. Henry begins to look elsewhere, his eyes wandering like a bored tourist. And Jane sees it all. She's close enough to smell the fear beneath the perfume, to hear the laughter that's just a little too forced. She watches and transforms from the kingdom's jewel into its target. The courtiers start to shift their loyalty, like rats rearranging themselves on a sinking ship. Meanwhile, at home, George and Jane's marriage continues its private collapse. He's rumored to have lovers, male or female, depending on which historian you ask. Jane becomes increasingly isolated, watching as her husband and his sister grow closer. Intellectually, emotionally, politically. Their closeness will one day become fatal. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, Jane is simply surviving, learning the dangerous rhythm of Tudor life. Rise, shine, fall, repeat. There's an image historians like to paint of courtly women. Delicate, docile, submissive. Jane wasn't any of those things. She was sharp, perceptive, maybe even bitter. She had to be. The court didn't reward kindness. It rewarded calculation. And Jane was calculating. Every time she smiled at Anne, every time she flattered Henry, every time she swallowed an insult, she was earning another day of safety. Still, even the sharpest minds get worn down by fear. The Tudor court was built on paranoia. Every letter could be evidence. Every friend could be a spy. Every whisper could lead to the tower. Jane probably learned to sleep lightly, to measure her words, to trust no one. And yet, irony of ironies, she trusted the Boleyns. Or at least she wanted to. They were family, after all. But in Tudor England, family loyalty was like cheap perfume. It faded fast when things got ugly. By 1535, things were starting to get ugly, and had given birth to Elizabeth, not the son Henry wanted. The charm that once enthralled the king was wearing thin. Henry's patience was evaporating, and Jane Seymour's pale, docile face was catching his attention. The court began whispering again, the same dangerous whisper that always comes before heads roll. Jane, stuck between her husband's ambition and her queen's desperation, must have felt the tension tightening around her neck. Every banquet toast, every polite bow, every silent dinner carried the same unspoken truth. The Boleyn family's golden age was beginning to rust. Still, life at court went on: music, dancing, politics, lies. The illusion of stability was everything. People laughed too loudly, prayed too often, and avoided looking directly at the king's changing moods. Because when Henry VIII's expression darkened, everyone's future did too. And Jane? She watched, waited, calculated. She wasn't foolish enough to think power lasted forever. She'd seen enough to know the court loved watching people rise, but it loved watching them fall even more. So she smiled. She played the game. She endured the cold silences from George, the whispered mockery from courtiers, the quiet dread that sat in her chest like lead. Maybe, in some dark corner of her mind, she even wondered what it would take to break free, to be more than the background character in someone else's tragedy. That thought will come back later. When the Bullen world collapses, and the tower's doors close, Jane will face an impossible choice: loyalty or survival. And history will remember her not for the years she endured, but for one decision that changed everything. For now, though, she's still smiling, still pretending, still trapped in the beautiful nightmare of Tudor glory. They say behind every great man is a woman rolling her eyes. Behind George Bullen, there's Jane, rolling them so hard she might have seen the future. And that future is about to get very bloody. May 1536. The air in London feels heavier than usual, like the whole city is holding its breath. The bells are quiet. The laughter at court has turned nervous. Even the gossip, usually as constant as the Thames, has gone hush-hush. Something is rotting at the heart of Henry's glittering world, and Jane Rochford, standing quietly in the shadows, can already smell the decay. And Bullen, once the radiant sun of the Tudor court, is dimming. The same courtiers who once knelt to kiss her hand now bow just a little less deeply. The king, who once rewrote religion for her, now barely looks her way. There's a new woman, of course there's always a new woman, Jane Seymour. Pale, submissive, and, most importantly, not an. It's hard to describe what that shift feels like unless you've seen it or survived it. One moment you're the queen of hearts. The next you're a ghost haunting your own throne. The courtiers smell fear like wolves. And the thing about Tudor wolves? They don't wait for the body to drop. They start tearing before the heart stops beating. Jane Rochford watches this unfold from close range. She's still Anne's sister-in-law, still married to George Bullen, though their marriage now feels more like a political contract written in resentment. George remains loyal to Anne, perhaps foolishly so. He jokes, defends her, stands too close to her at court. Maybe it's affection, maybe it's strategy. But in the atmosphere of paranoia Henry's reign has created, even a brother's loyalty can look like something else. The rumor begins as all Tudor rumors do, quietly, cruelly, and with just enough detail to sound convincing. Whispers swirl through the court, and has lovers, and is unfaithful, and George are too close. The story mutates like a virus, carried by fear and ambition. Henry's courtiers, desperate to stay in favor, begin feeding the fire. And before long, the impossible becomes inevitable. Henry VIII, of course, eats it up. A man who built his own religion to justify adultery now can't stand the idea that his wife might be unfaithful. The irony is thick enough to spread on toast. He orders an investigation, which is really just a death warrant in fancy clothing. This is where Jane's role becomes murky and infamous. Some say she hated George, that their marriage had soured to the point where she'd do anything to ruin him. Others say she was coerced, pressured, or manipulated by the men conducting the inquiry. After all, who was she to resist the king's demand for truth, refuse to cooperate, and she'd be sharing and cell in the tower by nightfall. So she talks, or at least someone claims she does. Documents from the time are vague, but her name appears among those who testified that Anne and George shared an inappropriate bond. One statement allegedly comes from Jane, describing familiarities between her husband and the Queen that no brother and sister ought to have. And just like that, the wheel of history turns, and Jane Rochford's name is carved into it, not as a witness, but as a betrayer. Let's pause here for a breath, because this is the moment everything begins to burn. Imagine standing in a courtroom knowing your words could destroy your husband, your queen, your entire family, and still being forced to speak. Was it vengeance? Fear? A desperate bid to survive? Or maybe it wasn't even her at all. Maybe her words were twisted, rewritten, invented by men who needed a scapegoat. The truth is we'll never know. All we have is the aftermath. On May 2nd, Anne is arrested, dragged to the Tower in a boat down the Thames, past the same crowds that once cheered her coronation. They stare now in silence. Some whisper prayers, others smirk. The Tower looms ahead like a stone monster waiting to be fed. George is arrested 2 days later. They say when he was brought before his accusers, He laughed. The defiance of a man who knows the trial is just theater. He was eloquent, bold, unrepentant. Even the spectators admired his poise. But Henry had already made up his mind. The verdict was written before the ink dried on the charges. As for Jane, she remains outside the tower, watching from afar. Imagine her there, standing at a window, hearing the distant toll of bells, wondering if she's just saved herself or damned her soul. History won't grant her tears. It never does for women like her. It only records her silence. And yet, you have to wonder, did she feel relief when George was condemned? Did she flinch when she heard the axe fall? Or was she already numb? The kind of numb that comes after too much loss, too much fear, too many nights listening for footsteps at your door? Because let's be honest, the Tudor court wasn't about right or wrong. It was about survival. And survival often looked like betrayal. Anne and George are executed on May 19, 1536. The sun shines because of course it does. History loves irony. Anne's speech is graceful, calm, almost saintly. She forgives everyone, even Henry. When the sword falls, it's swift, merciful, final. A few hours later, George meets the same fate, still proclaiming his innocence. And just like that, the Bullens, once the brightest stars in the Tudor sky, vanish. But Jane remains. She's alive, technically free, but branded by rumor and guilt. The court whispers again, this time about her. Did she really accuse her own husband? Did she conspire? Did she lie? The stories spread like wildfire, each version crueler than the last. She can't defend herself. No one can in Henry's England. Survival demands silence. And silence, unfortunately, looks a lot like guilt. The irony is almost unbearable. Jane Parker, the woman who tried to keep her head down, has now outlived the very people who gave her power, and she'll never escape their ghosts. So, when people call her the betrayer of queens, they forget she was also the betrayer of herself, trapped in a system where truth was irrelevant, and every word was a weapon. This was the Tudor version of cancel culture. Except when they canceled you, it wasn't with tweets, it was with a sword. Let that sink in. By the time the tower gates close behind Anne and George, Jane has learned the most dangerous lesson of all. Sometimes to stay alive, you have to let others die. And the court? It just keeps dancing, pretending nothing happened. But history doesn't forget. It waits. It whispers, takes names. And Lady Rochford's name is already written in blood. London, 1536. The city wakes up to rain again because of course it does. After all, even the weather seems exhausted by the drama. And Bullen is gone. George Bullen is gone. And the air at court smells faintly of triumph and something worse. Fear pretending to be relief. For Lady Rochford, it's a new day in name only. She's technically free. But freedom in Tudor England is like a candle in the wind. One wrong breath from the king and poof, you're gone. Jane's house feels quieter now. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that hums. The servants whisper about her when she passes. Some cross themselves. It's not every day someone outlives two Bullens. She should feel lucky, but luck in this world has teeth. When she closes her eyes, she can still hear the echo of that final drumbeat. The one that fell silent just before the sword. She's a widow now, which means she's lost her place in the Bullen machine, but not her danger. Being connected to a disgraced family is like wearing a sign that says, approach with caution. Previous owners beheaded. So Jane does what smart survivors do. She disappears. Or at least she tries to. Henry's court moves on with the emotional depth of a soap opera. The day after Anne's death, he's already engaged to Jane Seymour. The courtiers who wept for and yesterday are toasting his new queen today, pretending they never once whispered her name. It's like watching an entire nation gaslight itself. Jane, meanwhile, keeps her head down. She's back at court eventually, because that's what women like her do. They circle back, haunting the same gilded halls that ruined them. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's ambition. Maybe it's just that there's nowhere else to go. Let's pause there for a moment. Imagine being Jane. You've lost your husband, your queen, and your reputation. But you still have to show up to work every day and smile for the same man who killed them. That's not courage. That's pure survival instinct. And here's the twisted part. Henry doesn't hate her. In fact, he probably barely notices her. She's too insignificant now to be dangerous. That's the magic trick of Tudor England. You can vanish in plain sight. And Jane masters it. But guilt has a way of lingering. Every time she walks past the tower, she can feel it pressing on her like a bad dream. She hears the metal clink of the portcullis, the whispers of guards, the faint echo of a crowd gasping. The ghosts of George and follow her like perfume. Expensive, suffocating, impossible to wash away. And yet, time keeps moving. Years slide by like spilled wine, messy, stained, and impossible to clean up. Henry goes through wives the way most people go through handkerchiefs. Jane Seymour gives him the male heir he always wanted, then dies in childbirth, a pattern that probably made Tudor midwives develop anxiety disorders. Meanwhile, Lady Rochford keeps playing her quiet, dangerous game of invisibility. She flatters when needed, listens when not. Sometimes she laughs, sometimes she doesn't. The trick is to exist without being noticed, to be valuable enough to stay but unthreatening enough to forget. She becomes a background actor in history, one of those women who are always just there, serving, observing, surviving. But the thing about ghosts is they never stay quiet forever. Some nights she dreams of George, maybe of his eyes in those final moments, or maybe of the words she might have said or didn't say that sealed his fate. We'll never know. But even her enemies said she wasn't the same after his death. She aged faster. Her laughter faded. She began to talk less, observe more. In the chaos of Henry's marriages, Jane found her new talent: endurance. Still, endurance doesn't erase guilt. It just buries it under layers of etiquette and perfume. And at court, perfume was always stronger than honesty. So Jane stays, through the rise of new queens and the fall of others. Through banquets and executions, each one indistinguishable from the last. Through Henry's transformation from charming athlete to paranoid, swollen monarch. Through all of it, she remains the survivor in the corner, the one who knows too much and says too little. Imagine living every day surrounded by ghosts. She might think, staring at her reflection by candlelight, one of them my husband, another my queen. But ghosts aren't the only thing haunting her. There's also the unspoken truth. She's good at this. Good at blending in. Good at saying what people want to hear. Good at avoiding the blade. That's what the court demands. Compliance dressed as virtue. And Henry's court, for all its gold and music, is just a glittering graveyard. Still, Jane knows the rules. Don't stand out. Don't trust anyone. Don't love too loudly. The only thing worse than being noticed is being remembered. And yet, life has a cruel sense of humor. The quieter she becomes, the closer she drifts back toward danger. Because Henry's love life isn't done making corpses, and the revolving door of queens keeps spinning. Each one younger, dumber, or more desperate than the last. For now, though, Jane's safe, or as safe as anyone can be in a palace built on corpses. She tends to the new queen, curtsies when required, and perfects the art of invisibility. The courtiers barely speak to her anymore. To them, she's a relic of the Bullen disaster, a walking reminder that proximity to power can kill you faster than the plague. But hey, she might say, half smirking in the mirror, at least I don't have to explain that one at dinner parties, because what would she even say? Oh, I once helped destroy a dynasty and survived it. Pass the wine. The silence, heavy as ever, doesn't answer. Outside, thunder grumbles over the Thames again. The kind that sounds suspiciously like history clearing its throat. Because storms in Tudor England never end. They just take a breath. And somewhere, behind palace walls lined with gold and paranoia, a new queen is being fitted for her crown. Jane doesn't know it yet, but she's about to meet her next one. And this time, the ghosts won't be content to stay quiet. The year is 1540 and Henry VIII is single again, which, in Tudor England, is less a relationship status and more a national emergency. His third wife, Jane Seymour, has been dead for 2 years, and the king has been mourning in his own special way. by blaming everyone else and eating enough roasted goose to destabilize the poultry population. The court tiptoes around him like anxious interns around a furious CEO. But power abhors a vacuum, and so does Henry. So, with all the subtlety of a drunk uncle at a wedding, he decides it's time to get married again. Enter Anne of Cleves, a German princess chosen through what might be history's worst version of online dating. Henry sends his favorite painter, Hans Holbein, to capture her portrait, and when he sees it, he's smitten. A true beauty, he declares. It's love at first brushstroke. Then he meets her in person. It's hard to know exactly what went wrong. Maybe she wasn't as pretty as the painting. Maybe Henry was expecting a medieval supermodel. Or maybe, just maybe, she took one look at his swollen legs, smelled the pus from his infected wounds, and didn't swoon on cue. Whatever it was, Henry's romantic enthusiasm turned to instant regret. Their wedding night is so disastrous that he tells his advisors he's repulsed and cannot perform. A diplomatic way of saying, "I'd rather fight another war than share a bed with her." The court laughs behind fans and goblets. The king blames everyone but himself. And in the middle of this spectacular royal meltdown stands, you guessed it, Lady Rochford. Jane's back at court again, because like a cat with 9 lives and 0 boundaries, she keeps finding her way back into royal business. She's older now, wiser, colder. She's learned that surviving in Henry's court is less about loyalty and more about agility. You have to bend, smile, adapt, and most importantly, know when to vanish. So while the Cleves disaster unfolds like a romantic tragedy written by a drunk playwright, Jane keeps her head down. But she watches everything. She sees the courtiers scramble to spin the story, to make Henry's humiliation someone else's fault. She sees Anne of Cleves, sweet, foreign, terrified, trying to navigate a court where even laughter can be used as evidence. And Jane helps, quietly, subtly. She advises, delivers messages, smooths things over. She's good at that, the invisible lubricant in the gears of royal chaos. She whispers at the right moments, flatters the right people, and conveniently forgets the rest. When the marriage is annulled, Anne of Cleves walks away with her head intact, a rare Tudor achievement. She becomes the king's sister, earns a luxurious allowance, and moves into a castle. A woman outsmarting Henry VIII? Jane must have admired that, maybe even envied it. But Henry isn't heartbroken for long. Before the ink on the annulment dries, his wandering eye lands on someone new, Catherine Howard. Catherine is everything Anne of Cleves wasn't. Young, flirty, dangerously naive, and so radiant that Henry, now pushing 50 and limping from gout, decides he's in love again. Think of it as a royal midlife crisis, except instead of buying a sports car, he buys another teenager. The court rejoices, pretending not to notice the pattern. A fresh start, they say. A symbol of youth and hope, they say. The only thing Catherine Howard symbolizes is the next inevitable scandal. And Lady Rochford? She's right there again, assigned as Catherine's lady-in-waiting. The irony is so rich it could choke you. The woman who once helped destroy a queen now finds herself serving another. You can almost hear history snickering. At first, Jane must have felt relief. Catherine was sweet, affectionate, and clearly adored her. Maybe this was her redemption arc, the chance to finally serve a queen who wouldn't end up executed. But beneath the glittering facade, Jane notices the same cracks forming, the same whispering courtiers, the same dangerous energy that filled the halls before Anne's fall. Henry's obsession with Catherine is pathetic and terrifying all at once. He showers her with jewels, calls her his rose without a thorn, and grins like a schoolboy whenever she walks into a room. It would be romantic if it weren't coming from a man who had already executed 2 wives and invented divorce as a hobby. Catherine, barely out of her teens, tries to play the role of adoring wife, but you can sense the dread beneath her powdered smile. And Jane? She senses it too. She's seen this movie before, and she knows how it ends. But for once, she might not want to just watch it happen. She might want to control the script. So she leans in closer to the young queen, advises her, confides in her, becomes her most trusted ally, or at least That's what Catherine thinks. Maybe Jane sees a bit of her younger self in her, naive, hopeful, doomed. Or maybe she's just drawn, once again, to the irresistible flame of danger. You can almost imagine her inner monologue. Don't get involved, Jane. Don't do it. Don't. And then she does, because that's what she's best at. Being in the wrong place at the worst possible time. Still, for a brief moment, things seem stable. The court calms. Henry smiles again. The music plays, the feasts return, and Jane finally breathes. Maybe she thinks this one will be different. But the walls of Hampton Court have long memories, and the ghosts of the Bullens don't rest easy. The whispers begin again, softer this time, deadlier. About the Queen's laughter in dark corridors. About a handsome courtier named Thomas Culpeper. About secret letters. By the time 1540 rolls around, Henry VIII has gone through more wives than most people go through shoes. Queen Jane Seymour has died giving him a son, which in Tudor terms means she gets saint status by default. The court mourns, politely, briefly, before the king starts shopping for a replacement. Enter Anne of Cleves, the German princess whose portrait looks promising, but whose reality, well, let's just say filters were a problem long before Instagram. When Anne arrives, Henry's excitement deflates faster than his waistline expands. The king reportedly mutters, "I like her not," which is royal code for someone's getting annulled. The marriage lasts 6 months, shorter than some influencer brand deals. Henry blames everyone but himself, of course. The courtiers scramble to act like they never liked in any way, and the queen herself, bless her diplomatic heart, accepts the title sister to the king and quietly steps aside. And through all of this chaos, as Henry swaps wives and advisors like socks, Lady Rochford is still there, watching, listening, waiting. The woman survives every royal mood swing, every purge, every execution. She's like a shadow stitched into the palace walls, quiet, unnoticed, and somehow still standing when everyone else is dust. But fate, as always, has a sense of irony, because when one queen leaves the stage, another enters. Her name is Catherine Howard, young, vibrant, and catastrophically naive. Barely out of her teens, she's the kind of girl who thinks flattery is loyalty and that Henry's attention means safety. She's also related to Anne Boleyn, yes, that, and which makes her rise feel like history playing a cruel joke. When Catherine becomes queen, she brings Jane Rochford into her household as one of her ladies-in-waiting. Imagine that. The woman who watched Anne Boleyn's fall now serving her cousin on the same cursed throne. It's like watching someone return to a haunted house because they liked the wallpaper. Still, Jane sees an opportunity. After years of surviving on the court's margins, she's back near the center. Back where influence means survival. And maybe, in some twisted way, she sees Catherine as a second chance. Maybe she thinks, this time I can do things right. Or maybe she just can't resist the pull of power, that glittering, toxic light. Now, Henry isn't the young, gallant king anymore. He's older, heavier, limping from an infected leg wound that smells like a crime scene. His temper is shorter, his paranoia sharper. Catherine's youth flatters him. Her attention soothes his ego. But it's not love. It's nostalgia. The king trying to resurrect his own past through a girl young enough to be his granddaughter. The court knows it, but no one dares say it. Except maybe in whispers. And those whispers reach Jane. From the moment she joins Catherine's household, Jane senses the tension. The queen giggles too much, glances too long, blushes too easily around certain gentlemen. And one name keeps floating in the air like perfume. Thomas Culpeper, handsome, ambitious, and very much not the king. Jane notices the glances between them, the hurried notes, the way Catherine's smile lingers after Culpeper leaves the room. Maybe Jane looks the other way at first. After all, she's no stranger to secrets, and maybe part of her understands the queen's desperation. But this isn't just risky, it's suicidal. And yet, Catherine keeps playing with fire. Secret meetings, late-night whispers. Jane becomes the silent facilitator, arranging encounters, distracting servants, pretending not to notice. Whether she does this out of loyalty, pity, or sheer recklessness, we'll never know. Let's pause here for a second. You might be wondering, why would Jane, after everything, help another queen walk straight into disaster? Maybe she thought she was protecting Catherine. Maybe she thought, if I help her control this, no one else will find out. Or maybe, just maybe, she missed the thrill, the dangerous pulse of being close to scandal again. Because in Henry's court, danger and relevance were the same thing. Meanwhile, Henry beams like a man in denial. He parades Catherine around like a trophy he doesn't realize is cracking. The courtiers play along, because what else can they do? Smile, nod, and hope they're not next. Jane watches it all, a ghost walking through déjà vu. She's seen this story before. The king in love, the queen too careless, the whispers growing louder. And one night, as she helps Catherine prepare for bed, maybe Jane looks at her and thinks, you don't even know you're already doomed. Henry's love stories always start with roses and end with a scaffold. Everyone knows that. Everyone but Catherine. For now, the palace pretends to sleep peacefully. But the silence between the Queen's chambers and Thomas Culpepper's footsteps is getting louder. A tension so thick it could strangle the truth itself. And Jane? She's right there in the middle again. The observer, the helper, the enabler. History will never agree on why she did it. Some will call her complicit, others compassionate, and a few will simply call her foolish. But one thing's certain. When you live in the Tudor court, secrets don't stay buried. They rise like ghosts, knocking on doors at midnight. And sooner or later, one of those knocks comes from Henry's men. They'll ask questions, demand answers, they'll say names. And when they do, Jane Rochford will realize she's been walking the same circle all along, from the Bullen's golden age to another queen's downfall. Because in this court, the past never dies. It just changes crowns. Catherine Howard was the kind of queen who could make a room light up and accidentally set it on fire at the same time. Young, radiant, and about as politically experienced as a hamster, she entered the Tudor court like a burst of confetti in a funeral procession. She laughed too loudly, danced too freely, and flirted too dangerously for a king who saw betrayal in every mirror. Henry VIII at this stage was no longer the dashing prince of legend. He was a storm in human form, paranoid, wounded, and limping from a leg ulcer that reeked so badly courtiers tried not to stand downwind. But none of that mattered to Catherine. She smiled, curtsied, and played her part as if this were all one elaborate masquerade. To the outside world, she was the perfect royal fantasy, young enough to make Henry feel alive, foolish enough to think that mattered. And beside her, helping her dress, whispering court secrets and warnings, stood Lady Jane Rochford. Imagine that picture for a moment. Jane, the weary survivor, the woman who had seen 2 queens die and still found herself back at court, serving another doomed girl. It's poetic in the darkest way possible. Catherine adored Jane. She treated her like a confidant, maybe even a friend, a rare honor in a place where friend usually meant future witness. Jane, flattered and perhaps genuinely fond of her, played the role well. She was part lady-in-waiting, part emotional babysitter, and, as history will soon reveal, part accomplice. Because soon enough, the Queen's little games stopped being innocent. Catherine's flirtation with Thomas Culpepper, one of Henry's handsome gentlemen of the chamber, began as harmless court gossip. A few exchanged glances, some harmless teasing, but at the Tudor court, harmless doesn't exist. Whispers became truths the second someone powerful decided they were. Still, Catherine kept playing. And Jane didn't stop her. Maybe Jane thought it was a phase. Maybe she thought she could control it, that she could keep the Queen's heart in check before it brought the axe down. Or maybe, deep down, she wanted to believe love could exist here. That after decades of watching ambition masquerade as affection, she could help one woman escape that pattern. But that's not how Henry's world worked. The secret meetings began quietly. Late nights, locked doors, notes passed with trembling hands. Jane became the silent architect of the Queen's undoing, arranging private moments, sending messages, even standing guard while the Queen met Culpepper behind closed doors. Picture it. A dim corridor, candlelight flickering, footsteps echoing on the stone, and Jane, the betrayer of queens, holding her breath outside a door, listening to the faint murmur of laughter that could cost them all their lives. Let that sink in. This is the same woman who once watched and Bullen's affair rumors tear her world apart. And now she's reliving it, except this time, she's helping build the very trap she once tried to survive. Why? That's the question historians still can't answer. Some say she'd gone mad, broken by years of trauma and guilt. Others say she was manipulated by Catherine's charm, caught in the gravitational pull of youth and beauty. A few believe she was driven by desperation, that after years of invisibility, she finally wanted to matter again. Whatever the reason, Jane became the Queen's accomplice. She stood by her, offered advice, and swore secrecy. And for a while it worked. The palace thrummed with gossip, but no one dared accuse the king's new bride. Henry was besotted, blind, and desperate to believe he'd finally found his rose without thorns. But roses have thorns. They just hide them until the right hand bleeds. It all began to unravel with one letter. A careless note from Catherine to Culpeper, discovered by the wrong eyes. The kind of note that starts with affection and ends with a noose. Once it reached Thomas Cranmer, Henry's chief advisor and professional dream crusher, the quiet affair exploded into a royal investigation. The court turned ice-cold overnight. Servants vanished. Guards appeared. Doors slammed shut. The Queen's laughter stopped. And Jane? Jane froze. The same fear that once saved her now paralyzed her. She tried to protect Catherine at first, but the walls were closing in. When interrogators came knocking, her name was already on their list. She was questioned, threatened, and finally broken. Still, even then, there was something tragic about her loyalty. She didn't betray Catherine immediately. She hesitated, stammered, denied. But Henry's men were relentless. They pushed. They hinted at treason. And in Tudor England, treason didn't need proof. It only needed panic. Catherine, in her desperation, made it worse. She wept, pleaded, contradicted herself, and dragged Jane down with her. The investigators didn't need confessions. They needed scapegoats. And they found two women who fit the bill perfectly. One young and foolish, the other older and tainted by the ghosts of the Bullens. It's hard to imagine the fear that hung over the palace during those weeks. The way servants avoided eye contact. The way courtiers rehearsed their innocence in whispers. Everyone knew someone was going to die. They just didn't know who yet. In the middle of it all, Jane cracked. Whether from guilt, exhaustion, or sheer terror, she admitted what she knew. She confessed to helping arrange meetings between the Queen and Culpeper. Innocent, she insisted, but it didn't matter. In Henry's mind, she was back to her old role. The woman whose words destroyed queens. Only this time, the king wasn't going to let her walk away. Because when your husband is a paranoid king with a body count, the narrator might say with a sigh, the best idea is definitely an affair. The irony bites hard. Jane once survived by silence, and now silence is no longer an option. Catherine is imprisoned. Culpeper too. The Queen screams, begs, prays. But mercy is a language Henry's forgotten. And somewhere, in a dim chamber with frost on the windows, Jane Rochford sits trembling, realizing she's about to repeat the same nightmare. Only now, there's no chance of waking up. Maybe she whispers to herself, I was trying to help. Maybe she believes it. Maybe she doesn't. But history doesn't deal in maybes. It deals in consequences. And soon, Lady Rochford will discover that helping love survive in Henry's court is just another form of suicide. There's something especially cruel about déjà vu in Tudor England. You don't just feel like you've been here before, you actually have. The same walls, the same whispers, the same axe being sharpened somewhere out of sight. For Jane Rochford, this isn't history repeating. It's history laughing in her face. The year is 1541, and the palace has turned into a haunted house of secrets. Catherine Howard, once radiant and adored, now sits trembling in her chambers, her crown feeling heavier by the hour. Henry's affection, that unpredictable, volatile storm, has shifted again. He no longer calls her his rose without thorns. Now, she's just another weed in need of uprooting. The investigation into her alleged adultery spreads like wildfire. Servants are interrogated, letters are confiscated, and rumors multiply faster than the king's appetites. And right at the center of this inferno is Jane Rochford again. Jane is arrested first, hauled in by guards who don't meet her eyes, as if looking at her might invite bad luck. She's accused of aiding and abetting treason, the most lethal crime in Henry's dictionary. She's not a witness this time. She's an accomplice. The difference? Witnesses go home. Accomplices don't. When they question her, she breaks quickly, but not out of guilt. Out of exhaustion. Out of terror. Out of sheer, bone-deep déjà vu. She admits to helping arrange Catherine's meetings with Thomas Culpeper, but insists it was all innocent. A queen's private conversation, she says. But innocence is useless here. Henry doesn't believe in nuance. He believes in obedience, and when obedience fails, he believes in blood. The irony of it all is suffocating. Years earlier, Jane's supposed testimony helped condemn Anne George Boleyn. Now, her own confession is the nail in her coffin. The circle is complete. History doesn't just repeat itself, it drags you down with it. Henry's rage this time isn't theatrical. It's cold, methodical. He's older now, slower, but his temper burns hotter than ever. His leg infection stinks, his pride festers, and every new betrayal feels like an attack on what little masculinity he has left. To him, Catherine's affair isn't just treason. It's humiliation. And nothing enrages a tyrant more than embarrassment. Catherine is questioned next, her tears flooding faster than sense. She denies, then admits, then denies again. Every word she says tightens the noose. Culpeper confesses under pressure, the kind of pressure that usually involves a rack. And through it all, Jane's name keeps coming up. Henry's counsel is merciless. They debate her fate in quiet tones, using phrases like moral corruption and womanly madness, as if betrayal were a medical condition. Some argue that Jane's gone insane, that she's not fit for trial. Others argue that her sanity is irrelevant. Treason doesn't need reason, only someone to blame. Reports from the time say she lost her mind completely. She raved, screamed, and babbled incoherently in her cell. She spoke to ghosts that weren't there. Maybe she really did lose her sanity. Or maybe she just finally saw the truth too clearly. After all, there's only so much horror one person can survive before the mind gives up trying to make sense of it. Think about it. She's been trapped in the same royal nightmare for years. She's watched queens rise and fall, watched her husband executed, her name dragged through filth, her every decision twisted into evidence. Her entire life has been one long act of survival. But survival in Henry's court is a game no one wins forever. Ever wonder how many times a person can betray their own conscience before it turns on them? That's Jane's story in a single question. Every act of silence, every whisper she repeated, every secret she kept, they're all coming back now, one by one, clawing at her. And maybe that's the cruelest twist. Jane Rochford didn't die when the guards came for her. She died years ago, the moment she learned that telling the truth and staying alive were mutually exclusive. Catherine Howard, meanwhile, paces in her chamber, terrified and childlike. She still believes she can plead her way out, charm her way back into favor. She doesn't understand yet that mercy doesn't live here. Henry isn't a man anymore. He's a force of nature. Angry, unpredictable, and incapable of forgiveness. Eventually, both women are condemned. The sentence, death. Same tower, same axe, same slow walk through history's echo chamber. Jane's so mentally broken by this point that the executioners hesitate. There's actually a legal debate about whether they can kill her. Henry naturally decides that the law bends to his will, it always does. Execute her anyway, he reportedly says. Mad or not, that's Henry's mercy. Consistent cruelty. And so the orders are signed. Picture the tower again. The gray stones glistening with winter mist. The sound of distant waves hitting the Thames embankment. Inside, Catherine prays for forgiveness, still thinking like a child who believes in happy endings. Jane sits silent, or maybe still talking to ghosts. Two women, both pawns, both trapped in the same cage built by one man's vanity. It's hard not to feel the weight of that. Hard not to see the bleak symmetry. And Boleyn died because Henry wanted freedom. Catherine Howard dies because Henry wants revenge. And Jane Rochford dies because Henry wants to forget that any of it ever happened. In the end, Jane isn't the betrayer or the villain or even the victim. She's the mirror reflecting the cruelty of a system that devoured everyone, including her. There's no poetic justice here. Nori demscenark. Just history doing what it always does, punishing the powerless and pretending it's divine will. So when they lead Jane to her cell for the last time, she's already half gone. Her mind shattered, her voice a faint whisper lost in the cold air. Maybe she thinks of George. Maybe she thinks of Anne. Maybe she doesn't think at all. But one thing's certain. Henry's world has claimed another ghost, and the next morning the tower will echo again. 2 executions, 2 women, 1 king pretending to be God. The Tower of London wasn't just a prison. It was a mood, cold, gray, echoing, and merciless. The kind of place where even the air feels heavy, as if it remembers every scream that's ever rattled its stones. And now, once again, Lady Rochford is back inside it. Different queen, same outcome. The cycle that began with Anne Boleyn has completed its grim rotation. Jane stands where her sister-in-law once did, where her husband once did, staring at the same walls that swallowed them both. If ghosts exist, this is where they live. By 1542, Henry VIII's England is a nation drunk on paranoia. The courtiers whisper less now. They've learned what happens when the king overhears the wrong name. And while Henry lounges in his palace, pretending this is all God's justice, Jane sits in the tower's damp shadows, unraveling like a thread pulled too tight. The guards say she talks to herself. Others say she talks to Anne, or to George, maybe both. Her mind, already cracked by guilt and grief, finally gives way under the weight of it all. Some call it madness, but maybe it's something simpler: exhaustion. The exhaustion of surviving too long in a world designed to kill you. It's almost poetic in that bleak Tudor way. Jane once whispered accusations from beyond these walls. Now she whispers apologies within them. Catherine Howard, the young queen she served, is imprisoned nearby. The 2 women, one barely out of girlhood, the other worn down by time and regret, share the same fate. They say Catherine's terrified, pacing her chamber and praying for mercy. Jane, on the other hand, has stopped praying. Maybe she knows better. Maybe she knows God isn't listening to Tudor women anymore. Still, Jane tries to speak sense to her young queen. A letter survives, written from Catherine to Henry, begging for forgiveness. Historians suspect Jane helped her draft it, even in her broken state. Imagine that, the woman accused of enabling Catherine's sins helping her beg for mercy that will never come. It's almost beautiful in its futility. Henry's council debates what to do with Lady Rochford. Executing a woman deemed insane is technically illegal under English law. But this is Henry VIII, the man who created his own religion just to get a divorce. Legalities have never stopped him. When his advisors remind him of the rule, Henry reportedly shrugs and says something along the lines of, "Then we'll make an exception." Of course he does. So the orders are signed. 2 deaths scheduled for February 13th. The king, too cowardly to face his own sins, spends the evening hunting. History has a wicked sense of irony. Henry was always chasing something he could never catch: peace, loyalty, control. Meanwhile, inside the tower, Jane's world is collapsing in on itself. Her mind flickers between lucidity and madness. Some days she's quiet, staring at the wall as if waiting for it to blink. Other days, she screams. Not words, just sound. Raw animal sound. The kind that rattles even the guards who've heard everything. But beneath the madness, there's a strange kind of peace forming. Jane has stopped resisting her ghosts. She lets them in now. She talks to them like old friends. Maybe she imagines George standing beside her, smirking in that poetic, arrogant way he once did. Maybe she sees and, calm and composed, whispering that death isn't so bad once you stop fearing it. She's no longer the schemer, the courtier, the survivor. She's just Jane, a woman who tried to navigate a world that offered her no safe place to stand. Outside her cell, preparations begin. The scaffold is built again, the same wooden platform that's seen more royal blood than any battlefield. Workers hammer nails into the planks, their echoes bouncing off the stone like a death knell. In the courtyard, ravens perch on the walls, watching. They always do. Jane knows what's coming. Everyone in the tower does. The scent of sawdust and candle wax fills the halls. The smell of execution day. The guards speak in low voices, avoiding eye contact. Even the executioner sharpens his blade a little slower, as if hoping delay might undo fate. Catherine spends her final hours weeping. Jane spends hers silent. There's a moment, one of the few glimpses recorded, where she reportedly regains her clarity. Just long enough to understand everything. To see the pattern of her life stretched out before her like a cruel tapestry. Ambition, betrayal, survival, madness. It all ends here, and somehow that knowledge brings calm. For years, she might think, I watched heads fall. Now I know how it ends. There's no dignity in Henry's justice, but there's a strange, haunting grace in acceptance. Jane straightens her gown. She asks for forgiveness. From God, from her victims, from herself. Maybe she doesn't expect an answer. Maybe she's learned that forgiveness, like truth, doesn't survive long at court. When dawn comes, the sky is gray. A soft drizzle falls, blurring the edges of the tower walls. The guards come for her. She doesn't resist. There's no point. The tower doors groan open, and Jane steps into the courtyard. The same ground where Anne and George fell. History loves symmetry, doesn't it? The crowd is smaller this time. Execution has lost its novelty, but the silence is heavier. Even the birds seem to wait. Some witnesses later claim she appeared calm. Others say she was trembling. Maybe both are true. Fear and peace can exist in the same breath. And when she kneels at the block, maybe she whispers something only the ravens hear. Something like, "It's over now." The axe rises. It falls. And Lady Rochford, Jane Parker, the betrayer of queens, the survivor of chaos, the woman history loved to hate, finally becomes one of its ghosts. It's like déjà vu, but with more screaming. Morning breaks gray and reluctant, as if even the sun doesn't want to witness what's about to happen. The Tower of London stands silent, its stones damp with mist and memory. The air smells of wet wood, iron, and something older. The ghost of fear that never quite leaves this place. February 13th, 1542. The crowd gathers early. Not a roaring mob this time. More a weary congregation that's seen too many heads fall to muster much excitement. The weather fits the mood perfectly. Cold, biting, indifferent. Ravens perch along the battlements, waiting for breakfast. First comes Queen Catherine Howard, barely 20 years old. She's dressed in black velvet, her blonde hair tucked neatly under a white coif. Witnesses say her lips tremble as she walks, but she carries herself with surprising dignity. Or maybe that's just shock frozen into grace. She's so young that even the guards avoid looking her in the eye. Catherine kneels at the block, whispers a prayer, and then, in a small voice that probably sounds more like a child than a queen, says she dies a true woman to her husband. The irony is lost on no one. The axe falls cleanly. The crowd exhales. Then they call for Jane Rochford. There's a pause, the kind of stillness that hums. People shift uneasily. They've seen queens die before, but Jane's story feels different. She isn't royal. She isn't radiant. She's the woman behind the queens, the name whispered after every scandal. And now, she's walking the same path as the women she once served. She appears frail, pale, a shadow of the sharp-eyed lady who once navigated the court's glittering chaos. Some say she's regained her sanity in her final hours, as if her mind, sensing the end, decides to tidy itself up before leaving. Others say she's still gone, her eyes unfocused, her lips moving in silent conversation with ghosts. Either way, she walks steadily. The crowd watches in tense quiet. Some whisper prayers. Others stare, half curious, half horrified. The executioner shifts uncomfortably. Even he seems unsure whether this woman is tragic or cursed. When Jane reaches the scaffold, she glances, just once, toward the sky. Maybe she's looking for George. Maybe she's just making sure the heavens are still there. She stands for a moment, then begins to speak. Her words are soft, thin against the wind, but someone records them. She asks forgiveness. From God, from the king, from all others whom I have offended. It's the kind of speech you make when you've run out of words that matter. And then she kneels. There's something profoundly still about that moment. The entire court, for once, holds its breath. For years, Jane's voice was used to destroy others. Now it's gone forever. The silence that follows is deafening. The axe comes down. And that's it. No applause. No drama. Just the thud of inevitability. 2 women dead by noon. The tower's ravens scatter briefly, startled by the noise, before settling back down as if nothing happened. The guards begin cleaning the platform. The crowd dissolves into gossip and awkward laughter. Death, even royal death, has become routine here. But history remembers. It always remembers. Catherine's death will be framed as the tragic folly of youth. A cautionary tale for women who mistake affection for safety. But Jane Rochford's? Hers will be something else entirely. She'll be painted as the betrayer of queens. The woman who turned on her own blood. The court who whispered lies into the ears of men. It's the kind of label that sticks, especially to women. Never mind that the same men who condemned her rewrote every rule to justify killing her. Never mind that her madness was likely trauma. History loves a clean villain, and Jane fit the costume perfectly. Think about it. The same court that praised her when she helped destroy Anne Boleyn now damned her for helping Catherine Howard. It wasn't about morality. It was about timing. In Henry's England, virtue was a performance, and Jane ran out of lines. But here's the uncomfortable truth that history tries to whisper beneath the gossip. Jane Rochford wasn't evil. She was trapped. Trapped in a system that punished silence and honesty alike. Trapped in a marriage that chained her to the Boleyn's rise and fall. Trapped in a court that rewarded betrayal and called it loyalty. And when that system finally broke her, it turned around and called her mad for cracking. So when you hear that she died quietly, don't mistake it for peace. It wasn't serenity, it was surrender. The surrender of someone who finally realized that survival in this world was never really living. It's easy to paint her as the villain. Easier still to pity her. But the truth sits somewhere in between, a gray area, much like the sky over the tower that day. They say her blood seeped into the same ground where Anne and George's once did. That the ravens still circle that spot, cawing like a broken choir. Maybe superstition, maybe justice. But if ghosts linger, then the tower must be crowded. Filled with the echoes of people who dared to get too close to the throne. Lady Rochford's story ends here on this scaffold. But her shadow stretches further, through centuries of retelling, rumor, and revision. Every historian, every storyteller, every gossiping courtier adds a new line to her reputation. And somehow she never gets to defend herself. She dies beside the very queen she betrayed. Poetic justice, cosmic irony, take your pick. Either way, it's the full circle finale to a story that's never been fair. The axe falls once and history slams the book shut. But what if the story doesn't end there? What if Jane Rochford, the so-called betrayer of queens, was never really the villain at all? What if she was just the last one left alive long enough to take the blame? The tower is quiet now. Execution day is over. The scaffold has been dismantled, the sawdust swept away, the blood rinsed off the stones. But silence doesn't mean peace. In a place like this, silence hums, thick, alive, echoing with everything unsaid. The story should end here, but of course it doesn't. Because history has an annoying habit of dragging its ghosts behind it. And Lady Rochford isn't done haunting people yet. In the decades after her death, her name doesn't fade like most courtiers do. It mutates, twists. The pamphlets and gossip mongers of Tudor England need villains to sell their stories. And Jane, with her tangled history of betrayal and madness, fits the part perfectly. She becomes the betrayer of queens, a cursed archetype, the woman who turns on her own kind, and so begins her second life as a legend. Writers describe her as venomous, scheming, a woman of devilish wit. Others go further, calling her the whispering serpent of the Tudor court, the dark-eyed temptress whose words poisoned Anne Boleyn's bloodline and doomed Catherine Howard. Never mind that the men who wrote those stories were the same ones who glorified Henry as a misunderstood romantic instead of a serial husband with a god complex. Because sure, when men lie it's politics, but when women talk it's betrayal. That's how history works. Let that sink in for a moment. Over time, the details of Jane's life blur. Her humanity fades, replaced by caricature. Plays and novels resurrect her as the classic villainess, scheming in corners, laughing as the queens she served crumble. In some versions, she's practically Shakespearean. In others, she's a ghost, condemned to wander the tower at night, wringing her hands and whispering names to the wind. And maybe that's the most haunting part. How easily a woman's pain can be rewritten into entertainment. Centuries pass. The Tudor court collapses into memory. England changes kings, religions, even entire worldviews. But Jane Rochford lingers, in the footnotes, in the myths, in the whispers that echo down the cold corridors of Blickling Hall, where she's said to appear on the anniversary of her death. Witnesses claim they've seen her spirit gliding through the halls, headless, because of course it's always headless. Her ghost is said to carry a lantern, eternally searching for the queen she betrayed. A nice Gothic flourish, courtesy of the Victorians, who never met a tragedy they couldn't dramatize. It's easy to scoff at ghost stories. Easy to say, another tortured woman myth, move on. But the truth is, ghost stories survive because they fill the gaps history leaves behind. When the official records flatten a person into a villain, folklore brings them back to life, messy and misunderstood. And Jane's ghost, in that sense, isn't just supernatural. It's metaphorical. She haunts because she was never allowed to speak her truth while alive. Think about it. In every telling of her story, someone else speaks for her. The men who accused her, the historians who judged her, the writers who dramatized her guilt for an audience. Not once does Jane get to narrate her own story. So maybe her haunting isn't about revenge. Maybe it's just her way of saying, you got it wrong. You can almost imagine her ghost pacing through the tower, shaking her head at the tourists taking selfies, muttering, you think I was the problem? Try being married to the Boleyns. There's a strange comfort in that image. A woman who outlived her shame by refusing to stay quiet, even in death. But beyond the folklore, there's a deeper question. Was Jane really as monstrous as the legends say? Or was she just another woman trapped in a time where survival required moral contortion? Modern historians have started re-examining her story. Looking past the propaganda, they find someone complex, intelligent, strategic, deeply flawed, but also deeply human. A woman who made impossible choices in an impossible world. Maybe she did betray people. Maybe she didn't. But in a court where everyone was betraying everyone else, was she really any worse than the rest? Let's be honest. If the Tudor court had social media, everyone there would have been cancelled within a week. The only difference is that back then, instead of losing followers, you lost your head. And that's why Jane's ghost still lingers in our imagination. Because she represents something bigger, the eternal double standard. The way history punishes women for surviving the systems built to destroy them. Even now, when we talk about Henry's wives, we divide them into neat categories. The good, the bad, the boring, the tragic. But we rarely talk about the machinery that crushed them all. Henry built a world where loyalty was fatal, love was dangerous, and silence was the only safe sound, until it wasn't. Jane knew that better than anyone. She didn't invent betrayal. She just learned to breathe in it. 5 centuries later, we still haven't forgiven her. Not because she was cruel, but because she was complicated. And history, like the men who wrote it, has always preferred its women simple. So yes, maybe her ghost walks the tower. Maybe she paces through Blickling Hall, her candlelight flickering against old stone walls. But she's not haunting out of guilt. She's haunting out of defiance. She's saying, you called me the betrayer of queens. But tell me, Who betrayed whom? And that question, whispered through the centuries, still stings more than any axe ever could. History has always needed villains. They make the story easier to tell. Black and white, sinner and saint, neat little moral lessons that fit comfortably into textbooks and bedtime retellings. But history isn't neat, and Lady Rochford? She's about as neat as a beheading. The further we drift from Henry VIII's reign, the more historians start squinting at the fine print. The trial records, the court gossip, the so-called confessions that sound suspiciously like they were written by someone holding a quill in one hand and a sword in the other. And what they find isn't the clean-cut portrait of an evil woman drunk on treachery. It's something far murkier. Jane Rochford wasn't the scheming monster that early chroniclers made her out to be. She was the collateral damage of a monarchy that ran on fear and gossip. Every accusation that came her way, against George, against Catherine, was soaked in politics. She was trapped in a deadly improv show where the king wrote new rules after every scene, and everyone else was expected to pretend it made sense. The betrayer of queens label sticks because it's catchy. It's cinematic. It gives people a face to blame, a single villain to hiss at while ignoring the machinery of power grinding behind her. But think about this for a second. When Anne Boleyn was executed, 10 people were accused of treason. 10. Half of them men. Yet history remembers one woman's name, Jane Rochford's. Why? Because she was easy to vilify. Because the public, then and now, loves a woman we can point to and say, there, that's the problem. You see, the Tudor PR machine was basically TMZ with swords. Rumors weren't just gossip. They were weapons. The Boleyns fell because someone whispered the right lie to the right ear at the right time. Henry's court wasn't about truth. It was about controlling the story. And Jane, knowingly or not, became part of that narrative machine. She didn't invent betrayal. She was used by it. Let's pull back for a moment and look at her world. This is an England where women can't own property, can't vote, can't even choose their husbands. Their survival depends entirely on staying in favor with men, with queens, with fate. Jane's entire existence was a game of high-stakes chess where she wasn't allowed to move her own pieces. And yet she gets remembered as the betrayer. It's like blaming the pawn for the outcome of the match. Maybe that's why her story still feels alive today. Because everyone at some point has felt that pull, the pressure to play along, to smile when it hurts, to keep quiet when the truth might cost everything. Jane just lived in a world where the price of saying the wrong thing wasn't a bad day at work. It was death. Even now, you can feel the weight of the narrative bending against her. Open a history book and she's the schemer. Read a play and she's the villainess. But scroll through the academic work of modern historians, the ones who actually dig through letters, trial transcripts, and context, and you'll find something different. A woman painted by men who needed someone to make the king look righteous. Henry couldn't be the monster. He was the divinely appointed ruler, God's chosen man. So if his wives ended up dead, it couldn't be his fault. Someone else had to carry that burden. Someone had to be the whisper behind the throne. Cue Lady Rochford. And here's the twist. There's no concrete proof that she ever testified against and/or George Boleyn. None. The records that mention her are vague, secondhand, written long after the fact. For all we know, she may have been silent. But silence doesn't sell as well as betrayal. Because the quiet widow who kept to herself doesn't make for good theater. The betrayer of queens, on the other hand, sells like scandal always does. Let that irony settle in. Jane's real crime may not have been treachery at all. It was surviving long enough to become useful to someone else's story. By the time she fell with Catherine Howard, her reputation had already been poisoned. The people didn't need evidence. They just nodded and said, well, of course she was involved. She always is. It's the Tudor version of, she's got drama written all over her. And when you're branded like that, there's no escape. Once you're the villain, even your silence becomes suspicious. It's why Jane's legacy lingers like smoke, because she represents every woman who got written out of her own story, every scapegoat conveniently packaged as evil. The label betrayer is neat, but it's also lazy. It keeps the focus on her sins instead of the system that made them necessary. Let's be real. Henry's court thrived on betrayal. Spies were rewarded. Secrets were currency. Lies were the only language that kept your head attached to your shoulders. And somehow, Lady Rochford became history's fall girl for doing exactly what everyone else was doing: surviving. Maybe she was flawed. Maybe she was bitter. Maybe she was tired of being silent while men played gods. But calling her a villain feels like blaming the match for the fire. Maybe the worst thing she did wasn't betrayal, the narrator muses. It was surviving long enough to be remembered for it. The line hits harder the longer you sit with it. Because here's the final twist. 5 centuries later, Jane Rochford is still alive in every story about ambition, fear, and the impossible choices women are forced to make in systems that don't allow them to win. Her name gets whispered in every modern scandal, every public takedown, every time the world decides one woman's downfall will make everyone else feel safer. She's not just a Tudor ghost, she's an archetype. The scapegoat, the warning, the easy villain in a world that still hasn't stopped loving the spectacle of a woman's fall. So maybe it's time we stop asking whether Lady Rochford was guilty and start asking why we needed her to be. Names are heavy things. Some are worn like crowns, others like chains. And 500 years later, Lady Rochford still clinks when you say it. It's not just a name. It's a verdict that history keeps repeating. Betrayer of queens. The words follow her like a bad smell, soaked into the walls of every castle she ever walked through. But let's rewind to the centuries after her death, to when her story stopped being fact and started becoming folklore. People in the English countryside didn't talk about politics or policy. They told ghost stories. And few ghosts haunted England's imagination quite like Jane Rochford. At Blickling Hall, her ancestral home, they said her spirit rides through the grounds in a carriage, headless, of course, holding the lantern that once lit her path to execution. Locals swore that if you saw her on a foggy February night, it meant betrayal was coming for someone new. At the Tower of London, guards claimed to hear faint footsteps echoing near the execution site. The steady rhythm of a woman pacing back and forth, still rehearsing her last words. Now, whether you believe in ghosts or not, there's something unsettlingly poetic about that. Because even in death, Jane can't escape her reputation. Her story doesn't rest, it repeats. And maybe that's the real curse of history. It doesn't let women like Jane die, keeps resurrecting them to blame, to judge, to moralize. Every time her name appears in a new book or a new documentary, it's dragged back into the courtroom of public opinion. Guilty again. Always guilty. But here's the irony. The name Lady Rochford wasn't even hers to begin with. She inherited it through marriage, a title she gained from George Bullen, the brother of and the man whose death she's forever linked to. She wasn't born a Rochford. She became one. And once she did, she could never put it down. That's the thing about names in Tudor England. They weren't identities. They were lifelines. Your title determined your worth, your alliances, your survival. Jane learned that early. Being Lady Rochford got her a place at court, but it also painted a target on her back. It tied her to the Bullens' rise and fall. And when that family's tower of ambition collapsed, the rubble landed squarely on her. Imagine living a life where every introduction came with a loaded pause. Ah, Lady Rochford, that Lady Rochford. Every curtsy shadowed by suspicion. Every smile half polite, half condescending. She wasn't a person anymore. She was a cautionary tale in pearls. Imagine being remembered only for your worst day. The narrator muses quietly. The day the gossip won. Let that sink in. Because when you strip away the politics, the court intrigues, the scandals, Jane's story is heartbreakingly human. She made mistakes. She got scared. She tried to survive in a world that didn't forgive either. And when she finally broke, the world called her crazy and killed her anyway. Centuries later, we still talk about her, but not as a woman, as a symbol. She's shorthand for betrayal, disloyalty, deceit. Her name has become a punchline in royal documentaries, a ghost tour anecdote, a morality tale told in echoing hallways. But here's the part history forgets. The woman behind the myth wasn't extraordinary. She wasn't born evil. She wasn't plotting in shadows with a devilish grin. She was just there, caught in the orbit of a dangerous court, making impossible choices with terrible consequences. And yet, she's the one remembered. Henry VIII killed thousands. His advisors lied, tortured, schemed. But who gets remembered in whispers and ghost stories? The widow, the court lady, the woman who outlived her usefulness. Because history doesn't like mess. It likes symbols. And Jane, poor Jane, made an excellent one. Still, every symbol carries a truth, however distorted. And maybe the truth beneath her story is this. When a world built on male power starts to crack, it's always the women who fall first and the hardest. If Lady Rochford's ghost really does wander Blickling Hall, maybe it's not guilt that drives her. Maybe it's frustration, the kind that builds when you've been misunderstood for half a millennium. Picture her, drifting through the corridors, rolling her spectral eyes at the tour guides spinning melodrama for tourists. I wasn't the villain, she might mutter. Just the survivor who outlasted everyone else's lies. There's something strangely empowering in that. Because surviving Henry VIII's court wasn't easy. You could do everything right. Smile, obey, flatter, pray, and still end up in the tower. Jane managed to live through 5 of Henry's marriages. 5. The only mistake she made was getting involved in the 6th. So maybe the weight of a name isn't a curse after all. Maybe it's proof of resilience. Because while everyone else from her world ended up in history's footnotes, Jane's name still makes people stop, tilt their heads, and wonder what really happened to her. And in that wondering, she wins something rare for Tudor women. Attention. The kind of lasting intrigue reserved for figures who refused to disappear neatly into history's background. We've all said things we regret, the narrator says softly. Hers just ended dynasties. And yet, in a twisted way, that's exactly why she endures. Because Jane's story, messy, tragic, human, forces us to confront how easily power turns people into pawns, how survival can look like betrayal, and how reputations outlive truth. The past can't be rewritten, but it can be reframed. So the next time someone calls her the betrayer of queens, remember, that title says more about her world than it does about her. And somewhere, if ghosts really do keep score, I like to think Jane smiles at that. Here's the thing about history, it never really ends. It just changes costumes. Take off the corsets and crowns, swap the quills for smartphones, and the Tudor court starts looking suspiciously like Twitter. The players are the same, the stakes just come in pixels now. We don't chop off heads anymore, we cancel them. Faster, cleaner, and with better lighting. Lady Rochford would have recognized this world instantly. Public shame traded like currency? Check. People rising and falling based on rumor? Double check. A mob eager to watch it all happen from the comfort of their homes? Oh, absolutely. It's the same play, we just built better seating. 500 years later, her story still hits too close to home. Because let's be honest, gossip has evolved, but human nature hasn't. We still feed on downfall. We still crown and crucify with the same breath. The only difference is now, instead of Tudor courtiers whispering in corridors, we've got comment sections that hiss in real time. Lady Rochford walked. The narrator quips dryly, so Twitter could cancel. Think about it. Her entire life unraveled because of rumor, because one whispered accusation became truth before she could even deny it. Doesn't that sound familiar? The difference between history and trending hashtags is just the speed of destruction. Imagine Jane in 2025. She'd be trending by noon. Hashtag betrayer of queens would be plastered across feeds. Some anonymous account would post a source claiming she leaked private letters. TikTok historians would debate whether she was a manipulator or misunderstood. Reaction channels would upload videos titled, Lady Rochford, the woman who destroyed 2 queens, gone wrong. The comments, a battlefield, half calling her Queen of Chaos, half calling her literal garbage. Everyone convinced they know the truth, no one actually caring what it is. Sound familiar? Because the economy of betrayal hasn't just survived. It's thriving. We've turned outrage into entertainment. We measure morality in likes. The same hunger that once gathered crowds at executions now fills up watch time analytics. It's the same energy, just rebranded. And here's the part that makes you squirm. Jane wasn't special. She was just one person who got caught in a system designed to devour its own. The Tudor court was basically a live-action algorithm. It rewarded attention, punished silence, and deleted you when you stopped being useful. That's the machinery that still hums beneath our world today. Social media, celebrity scandals, politics, it's all powered by the same thing. People's desperate need to watch someone else burn so they don't feel the heat themselves. Henry VIII was the original content creator. He curated his image, controlled his narrative, and deleted his problematic queens with ruthless consistency. And the courtiers? They were the comment section, constantly guessing which side would get them the most favor. Jane's mistake wasn't being cruel. It was being visible when the algorithm turned. Now, before you think this is just some clever metaphor, consider how fast empathy evaporates in the modern world. One wrong headline, one out-of-context clip, and you're the villain of the week. We call it accountability, but half the time it's blood sport. The Tudors didn't have social media, but they understood virality. Scandal was their content. Death was their clickbait. And the Queen's downfall? Always guaranteed views. Let that parallel breathe for a second. Jane Rochford's tragedy is that she lived in a system where truth didn't matter, only narrative. And we still live there, we've just upgraded the tech. The court has gone digital, the thrones are virtual, and betrayal is still the easiest way to stay relevant. Back then, people whispered for survival. Now we post. Different tools, same instinct. So what does that say about us? That we haven't evolved as much as we'd like to think. We still pretend to be horrified by betrayal, while secretly craving it. It's drama, it's spectacle. It's proof that our own chaos isn't the worst. If you think Henry's courtiers were ruthless, try scrolling through the replies of a public apology tweet. Maybe that's why Lady Rochford's story still feels modern, because it is. Her downfall was the prototype for every pile-on that came after. Every time someone is publicly destroyed for amusement, every time a rumor spreads faster than the truth, every time we say, well, they must have done something, we're reenacting her execution, metaphorically, digitally, mercilessly. And before we judge too harshly, ask yourself, how many of us would have survived in Henry's court? How many of us wouldn't have whispered to save our own necks? How many wouldn't hit retweet on a scandal if it meant protecting ourselves from the mob? It's uncomfortable, isn't it? Because the truth is, we're all a little Tudor. We just like to think we're not. Maybe that's why her ghost lingers. Not because she wants revenge, but because she's still watching us repeat her story with Wi-Fi. The platforms have changed, but the psychology hasn't. Power still corrupts. Fear still silences. And betrayal, real or imagined, still sells better than the truth. So the next time we scroll past another public downfall, maybe remember Lady Rochford, the woman who lived through the first great cancel campaign, the one who lost everything, not because she was guilty, but because the crowd needed someone to blame. Maybe, deep down, she's the ghost in every feed, a quiet reminder that empathy shouldn't have an expiration date. Maybe we're not that different from Tudor courtiers. The narrator reflects, tone softening, just better dressed, and that line hits harder than it should. Because behind every scandal, every betrayal, every downfall, whether it's whispered in a candlelit corridor or posted under fluorescent lights, the same truth waits. People still love to watch someone fall. If there's one thing the Tudor court was good at, it was pretending. Pretending that loyalty mattered. Pretending that God was on their side. Pretending that love could survive power. But beneath all the velvet, jewels, and carefully rehearsed smiles, it was really just a glittering panic room. Everyone terrified, everyone pretending they weren't. Jane Rochford's story forces us to ask a question most people would rather ignore. What does survival cost? Because in her world, living another day wasn't an achievement. It was a transaction. You paid for it with silence, betrayal, or someone else's blood. Sometimes all three. It's easy to look back now, sitting comfortably in a world without executioners on retainer, and think, I would have done the right thing, sure, and maybe pigs would have flown over Hampton Court. But in Henry's England, there was no right thing. There was only alive and not. That's the first lesson of the doomed court. Morality bends when your neck's on the line. Let's take a moment to imagine Jane in those last calm years before her end. Picture her walking through the long galleries of Hampton Court, tapestries of hunting scenes watching her with stitched, judgmental eyes. Every step she takes echoes against stone floors worn down by history's favorites and its victims. She's older now, quieter, her laughter long replaced by that knowing half-smile people wear when they've seen too much. If she thinks about her past, maybe it feels like trying to remember someone else's life. The girl who once smiled at George Bullen's witty arrogance. Gone. The woman who stood silent as and fell. Gone. The survivor who thought she'd outlasted the storm. Still here, somehow, still breathing, still trying to understand what it all meant. It's tragic, but also strangely human. Because if you peel away the royal drama, the politics, the executions, what you find underneath is just people. People afraid to lose their place. People desperate to be loved. People who did terrible things not because they were evil, but because the alternative was unthinkable. That's the second lesson. History's monsters often start as victims who ran out of options. In the stories written about her, Jane is never soft. She's sharp, manipulative, icy. But imagine how many nights she must have sat awake, listening to the wind claw at the tower walls, whispering names she'd never forget. How many times she rehearsed her own defense in her head, knowing no one would ever listen. Maybe she told herself she was doing what she had to do. Maybe she believed it. Or maybe she stopped believing in anything altogether. Because when survival becomes a habit, conscience starts to feel like a luxury item. And if you think that's just Tudor fatalism, look around. The court is gone, but the system still exists, just with different wallpaper. Office politics, social hierarchies, power games that still chew people up and call it progress. The stage changes, the behavior doesn't. The Tudor court wasn't built for kindness. The narrator says softly, only for winners. And everyone lost. That's the third lesson. Power doesn't save you. It just delays the fall. And Bullen had it. Catherine Howard had it. Henry had it in obscene amounts. And yet not one of them found peace. Every victory turned to paranoia. Every love story turned to blood. It's almost comforting, in a dark way, to realize that no one actually wins the game. Not the kings, not the queens, not the courtiers. Just time. Jane's tragedy isn't that she betrayed people. It's that she lived in a world where betrayal was the only language anyone spoke fluently. So maybe, instead of hating her, we should pity her, or at least understand her. Because every human being, when pushed far enough, learns to speak the same ugly tongue. Still, there's one more lesson buried under all that doom. Even in the ugliest corners of history, there's something worth salvaging. Jane's story, bleak as it is, shows us what happens when empathy disappears, when people become tools for power instead of lives with meaning. She reminds us that no system, no court, no empire lasts forever. Not even Henry's. The man who executed wives like seasonal accessories eventually died bloated, sick, and alone, haunted by ghosts he claimed not to believe in. Meanwhile, the woman he destroyed without a second thought, her story still gets told. That's the quiet revenge of history. The courtiers bowed, flattered, lied, and vanished. Henry's grand palaces crumbled. His dynasty imploded. But the so-called betrayer of queens? She lingers, whispering from the margins, making us look harder at what betrayal really means. Maybe that's her redemption. Not sainthood, just relevance. The simple fact that, centuries later, we're still saying her name, not his excuses. It's easy to feel a chill when you think about that. The idea that history remembers those who refused to disappear neatly into silence. The ones who made us uncomfortable. The ones who left a question mark where everyone else wanted a period. So yeah, Lady Rochford was doomed. But she was also eternal. A ghost carrying her own lessons forward through time. If the Tudor court teaches us anything, it's that empires rot from the inside long before the fall. That the real executioner isn't the man with the axe. It's the system that builds the stage. And the final lesson? Maybe it's this. If you ever find yourself living in a world that rewards betrayal, silence, and fear, get out. or learn to haunt it. It's strange how time changes villains. The longer they're gone, the more human they become. Their edges blur. Their motives soften. Eventually, what used to be evil starts to look a lot like desperation. And if anyone deserves that kind of re-examination, it's Lady Rochford. History called her the betrayer of queens. But what if that's not her epitaph? What if it's her redemption arc? Because maybe betrayal, in a world as toxic as Henry VIII's, wasn't wickedness at all. Maybe it was a survival skill. Maybe the real betrayal was that she ever believed she could survive honorably. Let's strip away the layers of myth for a moment. Forget the portrait of the sneering court lady whispering lies behind jeweled fans. Picture, instead, a woman standing at her window in the half-light, 30-something, exhausted, still wearing the perfume of a court that has chewed her up and spat her out. The face staring back at her from the glass isn't cunning. It's tired, haunted, but behind the exhaustion, there's something else too: defiance. Jane Rochford refused to die quietly, not just on the scaffold but in history. She kept showing up in other people's stories, refusing to fade into the background. Every historian who tried to bury her under condemnation accidentally kept her alive. Every retelling that called her mad or wicked gave her another breath. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of immortality she wanted. Because in a court where silence was deadly, she made sure her voice still echoes, even if through misunderstanding. But if we look closely, between the lines of the records, between the pages of propaganda, we can see something deeper. Pattern. A warning. A woman who kept being forced into impossible situations by a system that demanded perfection and punished humanity. She wasn't scheming for power. She was trying not to drown. That's the part that modern audiences finally seem to understand. For centuries, women like Jane were cast as cautionary tales. Don't be like her. Now, they're starting to be recognized as the inevitable casualties of corrupt systems. Not villains, survivors who got caught in the gears. Maybe that's what redemption looks like in history. Not forgiveness, just understanding. In a world that taught her betrayal was survival, the narrator says slowly, maybe the real betrayal was believing she had a choice. That line hits like a dagger, because if you think about it, no one in that court had choices. Not really. Not the queens who were traded like alliances. Not the courtiers whose smiles hid fear. Not even Henry himself, shackled to his own paranoia. Jane's so-called betrayal isn't unique. It's universal. Everyone in that gilded nightmare betrayed someone. The only difference is that Jane got caught. And yet, 5 centuries later, she's the one whose name still stirs debate. That's power. Twisted, maybe, but power nonetheless. She's more than her worst moment. She's every woman who ever tried to navigate a world built by men who punished them for existing wrong. She's every person who's ever been trapped between truth and survival, conscience and fear. And here's the uncomfortable part. She's also us. Because who among us hasn't chosen safety over honesty? Who hasn't stayed silent when speaking up might cost everything? Jane's story lingers because it's not about royalty. It's about being human in a system that rewards cruelty and calls it strength. She's the ghost that keeps asking, what would you have done? That's what gives her story its endurance. She's not a neat tragedy. She's a mirror. Cracked, dark, but still reflecting. Let's be honest. The older Henry grew, the more monstrous he became. He tore through wives, faiths, and loyalties until even God got tired of him. Yet when we talk about the Tudors today, it's not his sermons or victories that fascinate us. It's the women. And Catherine, Jane, Lady Rochford, the ones who were supposed to be forgettable, the ones whose stories refused to stay buried. That's her revenge. Not haunting halls, not rattling chains, just enduring. Her name, her story, her contradictions, they outlived every man who condemned her. History is a long game, and she won it quietly. If ghosts really do linger, then Jane's isn't pacing in sorrow. It's watching calm, almost smug, as the world finally catches up to the truth she already knew. That the line between loyalty and betrayal is drawn not in blood, but in fear. History loves villains. The narrator murmurs, tone dripping with quiet irony. It just forgets who wrote the script. And that might be the real redemption here, realizing that we've been reading the wrong version all along. Because when you peel back the labels, when you look past the propaganda, you don't find a monster. You find a woman who was cornered by a game she didn't design, and refused to die quietly in it. Maybe that's all redemption really is. So when the candlelight flickers in Hampton Court at night, and someone swears they hear faint footsteps on the stone, maybe it's not haunting at all. Maybe it's persistence. A reminder that history doesn't belong only to kings and conquerors. It belongs to those who were blamed, broken, and still remembered. Lady Rochford's ghost doesn't need to be forgiven. She already got what the rest of them never did. The last word. And in the quiet echo of the tower, where power once roared and now only whispers, maybe, just maybe, she's laughing. Dawn creeps over the Tower of London like an apology. The fog drifts low, softening the edges of the stone. The world moves on, as it always does, pretending nothing extraordinary ever happened here. Tourists snap photos, school groups shuffle past with sandwiches and maps, and somewhere in the distance, the Thames slides by like it's been trying to wash England clean for 500 years. But the ghosts remain. You can feel them if you stand still long enough. The breath of something old, heavy, waiting to be understood. Lady Rochford's story ends where it began, in silence. No monumento, no joy de statue, no royal pardon. Just a name carved into history with shaky hands and sharper words. Yet somehow, out of all the figures who danced and died through Henry's court, she is the one we still talk about. Not the king's advisors, not half his ministers, not the sycophants who clapped the loudest while the axe fell. Her, because she embodies something we can't look away from, that human ache to be seen, to matter, even in a world that punishes both. 500 years later, we can finally see her without the smoke of propaganda blinding us. She wasn't a saint. She wasn't a monster. She was the gray space in between, the part of history that doesn't fit neatly on a plaque. And in that grayness, she becomes more real than all the marble Henry left behind. Let's picture her one last time. Not the trembling woman on the scaffold. Not the whispering courtier. But Jane Parker before the storms, before the blood. A girl born into a world where her choices were made for her before she could even spell her name. She wanted safety. She wanted belonging. She wanted, perhaps foolishly, to matter. That's all. And that's the cruel trick history plays on people like her. It grants them immortality, but only through infamy. Still, maybe she'd take it. Maybe she'd laugh that sharp little laugh of hers and say, "At least they remembered me," because in a sense, she won. She outlived her enemies not in body, but in story. Henry's bones turned to dust centuries ago. His palaces cracked. His heirs dwindled. His glory faded into the footnotes. But Jane's voice, distorted, debated, denied, still flickers through every retelling. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the lesson the Tudors accidentally left us. The truth always outlives the propaganda, even if it takes half a millennium to crawl back into the light. The camera, if this were a documentary, would pan across the tower grounds as the narrator's voice drops into that low, steady calm. The kind that invites both chills and quiet reflection. 500 years later, it says, Lady Rochford's story still whispers, a reminder that in every empire built on fear, someone always pays the price for survival. And sometimes, the one called betrayer is just the last one left standing. Pause. You can almost hear the wind carrying it away, that single line that hovers between tragedy and truth. Because in the end, every betrayal in the Tudor court was just a symptom of power, of fear, of human frailty. And Jane's life was the diagnosis. We love to think we've evolved beyond all that. But look closer. Power still seduces. Gossip still destroys. Empathy still evaporates the moment it becomes inconvenient. Maybe that's why her story still lingers. It's not just about kings and queens. It's about us. About what we're willing to sacrifice to feel safe, to stay favored, to keep our heads, metaphorically or otherwise. And perhaps that's why her ghost doesn't scare us anymore. She doesn't represent horror. She represents truth, uncomfortable, unavoidable, enduring. So yeah, the narrator says quietly, almost with a sigh, breathe that in, dust and all, because that's all history really is, dust and echoes, the remains of choices made in fear, pride, and hope. Still, if you listen carefully, beneath the hum of the city, the chatter of tourists, the flutter of pigeons against the tower walls, you might just hear her, not crying, not cursing, but whispering, something like, "I was never what you said I was, and isn't that what everyone wants, in the end? To be seen clearly, not as rumor, not as myth, but as human." So as the camera fades to black, and the narrator gives that final half-smile, the kind that says, "You've just been told a story you'll keep thinking about," we leave Jane where she's always been. Not forgiven, not condemned, just remembered. Still watching, you know what to do, history's not over yet. If you've made it this far, congratulations, you just survived the Tudor court, and honestly, that deserves a medal. Hit subscribe before history repeats itself, because the next scandal, the next downfall, the next so-called betrayer might already be writing her name in the dust. And trust me, you'll want to hear that story too.